All right. Welcome back, friend full to Counsel and Might. Technical glitches as usual. Every time we do this, Lord willing, by God's help, we get a little better. So I'm going to bring in my friend Patrice Petel from the great province of Quebec
How are you? How are
to
you?
bring him
How are
on.
you?
You're not on yet, so I'll just give you a second there, and I'll put you on there. So
Excellent.
I didn't know I've been in contact with Brother Pat there for, I don't know, for a few years. People put us in contact. I think somebody told me about him. Somebody told him about me. And we kind of connected theologically and spiritually, whatever you want to call it. And to my surprise, I found out. When did I find out? I found out like, I don't know, a few weeks ago that he has a PhD in Open Theism. You never even told me. You never even told me that you're
Yeah, I have a PhD on Open Theism.
that you're doing that. And you just completed that, right?
I completed it. I completed a master's in apologetics and philosophy, and a PhD in the same theme. But I took so long to do the language requirements for my master's that I got the two one right after the other. But my PhD thesis is on open theism, dynamic omniscience, which is basically open theism, and also modernism and the problem of evil.
Wow. That's all.
Yeah, it's quite a read. It's quite a read. It took me about 2 years and a half to do the work, but yeah, it was a lot of work. But I enjoy it. Yeah, I enjoyed the work.
Sure it is. Pat, I'm going to ask you, can you move the camera? I can't tell if that's your left or right. I just want to center the camera on you a little bit more. Turn it one way or another to see.
Oh, wait a second. Let me just.
Or maybe if you move the
Hmm.
chair, or if you just move the chair,
Oh, I can just move the chair,
if you just
perhaps.
center yourself to the, or move,
This
yeah,
way
yeah,
or
no,
this
no,
way?
the other side.
The other side. Okay.
That's it.
There.
That's how we do things here. We just
Okay. That's
spitball
fine.
it. All right.
Yeah, yeah. That's how I like it.
Okay. So to me, this is an important subject because, um, so as a pastor, we don't want to just be armchair theologians. It's important for us that I want to discuss things that have an impact practically on our Christian life. So, although it's great to geek out on theology, it's better than geeking out on anything else really. But I believe that it has a practical impact, and hearing some of my friends talk to me about it, some people, and this is not so much open theism, but a lot of us have been taking stock how much Calvinism there is in our theology and how much it affects our prayer life and how much it affects our soul winning. And as I've been purging Calvinism from my system, I've been realizing how deep the roots were because it dominates the Christian ether, especially the academic kind of ecosystem, as far as Christianity is concerned. And the more I've been purging it out, the more I've been really encouraged to pray, believing that it can change things, and believing that what we do for soul winning has an impact. That everything we do really has an impact. It's not like we're following a pre-written script and there's nothing you can change to it. Well, that's what I see in the Bible. I see that the future can be changed, that people could successfully pray and change the mind of God. And I say this because the Bible says this. And we can talk about all the implications of those verses. So I just want to put that out there that it's important. It does have a practical application. Now, in my own life, as I've been moving away from Calvinism, I was a Calvinist for 3 years. It's like I was adopting, unbeknownst to me, some tenets of what people call open theism. And then when I heard open theism, I'm like, well, I started believing this thing similar to that like years ago without even hearing what the expression meant. But the more I studied it, and the more I've discussed it, it does seem like there's some elements of open theism that I'm not comfortable with. And it does seem to me, and this is where I want your clarification, that the charge that essentially open theism just does away with prophecy. and I'm not talking about prophecies where God says he will do something. I'm talking about prophecies about third party, altruistic. I use altruistic in the sense of other, altruistic fulfillments of prophecy, not what God himself would actively cause to happen. So those are things that are kind of a little bit troubling me. I'm worried that open theism might be an overcorrection to Calvinism, that the pendulum is being swung kind of the other way. So those are the things I want to talk to you about today. I've had brother Rick Warren. I keep calling. I'm sorry, brother Warren.
Warren McGrew.
I'm sorry, Warren. Warren McGrew. Warren McGrew on, and he. I'm not sure that I've had him on twice, and I'd like still some more clarity. So that's why I'm excited to talk to you. And
So
I want to ask you to start with if you can give us like a brief layman level explanation of open theism.
certainly. So open theism is a model of God. So it's a model of God. So by model of God, just so that we understand what a model is a construct, a human construct. To understand something, to dumb down, or to dumb down is it's not in a pejorative way.
Right.
For instance, atomic model. When I'm a teacher, I teach adult education. I teach the whole of high school, but my training is in science. I'm a science teacher. So when I teach atomic models to my kids, they're adults, to my students, we use models. So there's the atomic model with the nucleus and the electrons going around. So this is a model which simplifies reality so that we can understand it. So models of God, there are several models of God. You mentioned Calvinism, which has a model of God attached to it, which is usually the classical model that the scholastics in the Middle Ages, with a large part of it is Augustine and Thomas Aquinas and so forth. So they developed this idea based pretty much on Platonistic ideas about a sort of God, which is like almost an inanimate object, because he cannot suffer passions, he cannot do anything, basically.
Mm-hmm.
He has he has no potentiality, just actuality. So there's all this big model of God, and everything must fit into this model. And Calvinism is largely dependent on this model, on this idea of God. Now, so there are other models of God, and open theism is essentially a model of God, or actually a model of how God chose to create the universe. Because essentially, all non-classical models of God, or semi-classical, or some call it neoclassical models of God, usually they start off with the idea that before God created anything, before God chose to create anything, he had this vast field of unlimited possibilities before him, sort of. And this vast field of possibilities, so certain models like modernism will say that while there's all these necessary truths, there's all these possibilities, and this is in modernism, this is called the natural knowledge. It is a knowledge that is that God has because of his own nature. Okay, so essentially, and then other models will add. So modernism will add to this middle knowledge, whereby God knows all what everybody could do and would do in all the possible situations. So they add this middle knowledge, and then there's this creative decree, where they settle what will happen in history. So everything that happens is settled at the creative decree. Right. Now, so open theism or dynamic omniscience. So I like dynamic omniscience more than open theism, but essentially one is a subspecies of the other.
Which
So,
one's the subcategory of which?
well, open theism is a term that came first, and
Okay.
dynamic omniscience, as I see it, is like a subcategory of the different kinds of open theism. So, in this view, so
Okay.
in the way I describe it, so you remember the three types of the three moments, like natural knowledge, middle knowledge, creative decree, which is free knowledge in this whole model of God.
Yeah.
Well, dynamic omniscience says, listen, there's natural model, the natural knowledge, and then it's open. Because God knows all the possibilities and all the necessary truth.
That's
You also
natural. So
know
that's natural knowledge.
that's natural knowledge. And dynamic omniscience basically says this is how God is now also. So he has all the possibilities, plus everything that he decided he will do, plus everything that is necessary. All the necessary truth
Okay.
he knows, all the possibilities he knows, and then all that he has decided that he will do, and this is a settled decision by God.
So, okay. Now, I was going towards Molinism, and
Yeah.
and then I realized when William Lane Craig started talking about God creating a kind of world, that expression to me, world, it sounded like it was set. I'm like,
Yeah.
I was thinking to myself, hang on a second, this is basically kind of, you still have a set course, a future. It's a way to save free will, but when I read my Bible, and I was and I was telling that to Brother Warren McGrew, and I agree with him that the language of the Bible is, in a lot of ways, is an openly theistic language. Okay, but for a lot of us, kind of the philosophy, we may understand it, we may not, and I want to kind of like cut to the practical issues. So why, can you tell us why, if God, so I'm going to posit a scenario, a worldview, a model of God, if you will.
Yeah.
And you tell me what would be the issue for you in that model. What would you not be comfortable with in that model? What would be erroneous in that model according to your understanding? So what about if I've got a God, so it's basically, it's simple, the simple foreknowledge, that knows, God knows all things that are going to happen, and so we're not talking about, okay, so God knows all things that are going to happen. In this scenario, God is not a timeless God, though. Okay, he's not a timeless God. So this is the scenario I'd like to study and explore with you, because most scenarios, it's open theism. In most scenarios, it's open theism with a non-timeless God, or it's closed theism with a timeless God. So what if I take a little bit of both worlds, and I've got a God who, if the Bible says that, Isaiah says that he inhabiteth eternity, and Brother Warren had some good answers to that, and I want to hear what your take would be. And the multitude of counselors, there's safety, the Bible says. So I've got human beings existing in time, past, present, and future, and I also have a God that experiences time, but he inhabits eternity, so he's in a dimension above. But there's still time there. There is still time there. He is located punctiliarly on that time, at a point in that time. So, but he knows the future, not because he's timeless and he has crunched all of time into one singularity, but rather because he has the ability to run ahead and see what's happening down the line, or go back and see what's happening in the past. So my question is, how does God's foreknowledge of the future in this scenario, where he can run down and see what's going to happen, how does that negate free will?
Okay, great question. So if I understand if I understand what you're saying that there's history, and God has this kind of zip line that he can
that's a good
run.
analogy. Yeah.
So he has this kind of zip line that he can just go ahead and see in the future what's happening and come back, kind of. Is
Right.
that what I
Yes,
okay.
sir. Yes.
Excellent. So my main problem. So let's just pause here a second. Just let me make a parenthesis and
Sure.
see if you can follow my thinking.
Sure.
So earlier in the discussion, you mentioned about how monism, we were not comfortable because of this idea of world, as if everything was settled. All right, and you're
Right.
right. You're right because by definition, a world in this possible world semantic is a complete proposition of every state of affair, every possible state of affair in this particular world. So a complete proposition, which means a complete description.
Gotcha.
So this world, it has everything that is going to happen ad infinitum. All right?
Okay.
So to eternity. And this is complete in itself. Everything that is possible to occur in this world will occur in this world. If it doesn't occur, then it's another possible world.
Gotcha.
Or it's impossible and it's not a possible world. Okay. So this zip line you were talking about. So imagine that there's this analogy, there's this metaphor in the literature that speaks of a thin red line. So this idea of thin red line is, imagine a tree, like, you know, those evolutionary trees we saw when you were kids in those science books. Okay, forget the evolution,
No,
but
I
just
got you.
the analogy.
Yeah.
And so they would draw a line up to man, if you remember the.
Yes.
Okay. Now this thin red line, imagine all the possible branches of time, and you've got one line that brings you to the present. Now this zip line you're describing must follow that thin red line to the future. It cannot follow all the other red line, because if God is visiting that future, then he is following that one and unique future that is ahead of us. So it presumes, it takes for granted that there is only this one future in front of us.
Okay.
I don't know if you're.
No, I definitely got it. At least I'm pretty confident that I got it. When I don't, I would let you know. And if I didn't, you'll correct me. So I want to take just a few seconds to kind of gather my thoughts and to kind of clearly express what I'm thinking in reaction to this. Okay.
Yeah, no problem.
Because this is a difficult subject. It's
yeah,
really,
it is. It's
mind expanding
mind
or breaking.
Yeah,
one of those. I can bend it enough to snap it. Okay. I'm wondering if that objection, my hunch is that objection might be confounding so okay, just give me a few seconds so I can really put it together.
No problem.
And I'm glad this isn't, see, that's the advantage of a discussion format over a debate format. You know, I mean, I'm going to be debating on Standing for Truth on Saturday on Total Depravity. But in a debate, you can't do this.
No. But this is why I accept these kinds of discussions, because I'm not a debater. I'm a thinker. And there's this guy, I never remember his name, but his name is Maurice Blanchon, a French philosopher.
Okay.
But what I like, this one quote from him, he will say, "Quand j'affirme, j'interroge encore." So when I affirm, I'm still questioning.
Right.
And this is my mindset. So I've studied this extensively. Really extensively, but I'm still questioning, so I might still be wrong. So I'm not interested in staying in the wrong side of truth. I want to follow truth where it leads.
I really appreciate your spirit, Brother Pat, and others I've spoken to. Everybody I've spoken to on this subject has had a good spirit, and I really appreciate that. So, okay. So, let me come at it from this angle.
Sure.
No, whichever model of God's omniscience happens to be true,
Yeah.
once we get into the future, and that's constantly happening, granted, okay, but let's pick an arbitrary point in time for the sake of illustration. So let's say we in 1,000 years from now, in whatever model of omniscience, there will always be, looking back, one actualization of all the possible futures.
I agree.
Okay, so because of that, so if it's okay, so I'm kind of thinking, I'm processing as I'm talking to you, because a lot of times we do our best thinking when we're trying to express things, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Okay. So in whatever model that line is actualized,
Yeah.
and wouldn't therefore the objection equally apply to open theism, because ultimately in either scenario it's always one actualization of a state of affairs that will be true in the end?
So, good point. So the thing is, in our understanding, it's like there's this saying, there's no use crying over spilt milk.
Yeah.
So in the past, everything is fixed. It's the fixity of the past.
Right.
It has occurred. And even God cannot change the past. Because if he did change the past, in his past, it would still be the
Yeah,
past.
you get all kinds of philosophical contradictions. Yeah.
Okay, so the thing is, there's this relationship that is not the same if you look back than if you look forward. So if you look back, so there's this relationship we have with the future that we don't have with the past. We would never say there's no use crying over milk that will be spilled. It's like this old joke that says, this old blonde joke, not very PC, but there's this lady with blonde hair walking on the street, and she sees a banana peel on the sidewalk, and she says, "Oh no, I'll fall once again," because she sees the banana peel and she'll step on it and she'll fall. So we don't. The whole point of the joke is that it is ridiculous to see something in front of you and just think that it is unavoidable. Some things are unavoidable,
Okay.
but in our basic, everything seems, there's a lot of things that seem avoidable. So there's not this fixity of the past, of the future, I mean.
Got you. I think it's Augustine that said, and you can challenge that, but he may have been quoting someone else, but he said, my knowledge of the past did not cause the past. My foreknowledge of the future doesn't cause the future any more than my knowledge of the past has caused the past. Now, I realize your answer still holds to what he said, but what if the objection of the open theistic objection to the scenario I posited is only standing on the modality of God's foreknowledge of the future, meaning in the counter objection, it seems that the modality that is assumed in the counter objection is that there's a fixed future and a reality, like a track. It's like this kind of track that God must have built, because who else would have built it? It doesn't happen on its own, and he kind of just extends that track into the future. Maybe the modality. Maybe it's my fault because I posited that modality. Maybe the modality is not so much that God zip lines down the future. If he is so infinitely, and the Bible says his understanding is infinite. So if he is so infinite in wisdom and infinite in omniscience, can he not extrapolate all future conditions that will be actualized?
Okay. So if I understand what you're saying that because of God's infinite understanding, and I question the use of infinite, but I'll grant it for you for the sake of this discussion.
Sure.
So because of God's infinite understanding, you're saying that
he can predict, like people predicted. Some people can predict things, and God basically has infinite predicting power.
Okay. So that assumes several things in my mind, in my opinion, because I think that the point of contention right now in our discussion is that zip line, because that zip line must be over and above that thin red line. The two must be parallel one to the other.
So remind me of the thin red line being
the one single path ahead.
Right, the actualization path.
The actualization path.
Okay, got you. Okay, carry on.
Okay.
Yeah.
So these two lines, the zip line of your analogy and the thin red line, these two must be perfectly parallel, because God must know what will occur in that thin red line. All right. So
correct.
So they must be perfectly parallel.
Correct.
Now, this is the point of contention. What dynamic omniscience folks, open theist folks will say is that there is not one thin red line. There's all these lines. And of course, only one will be actualized, because as when people make decisions, we live, make decisions.
You're closing the zip line behind you.
We're closing the zip line behind you.
Right.
So there's one left.
Right.
Now, but we don't believe that there is one thin red line ahead. We believe there's one behind. So now, what's interesting of this, and I was reflecting on this a while ago, is that are you feeling, this is still philosophical, but it's right on point. So are you familiar with the logical square, where you've got contradictions, oppositions? Are you a bit familiar with this?
No. I saw a political equivalent a few weeks ago. But go ahead.
The logical square, let's say you've got a universal. So all humans are mortal.
Yeah.
Okay? So the contradictory of that is some humans are not mortal.
Okay.
That is the perfect contradictory, which means that if one is true, the other one must of necessity be false.
It's the defeater, yeah.
It's the defeater. It's the perfect defeater. Right. They cannot both be true and they cannot both be false.
Right.
All right?
Right.
So that's the perfect contradictory. So, which means that what you're saying and what the model you were talking about, and it's not you, it's not only you, it's Molinist and everyone that posits that you can have a full description of a world, of a possible world before us. Because the thin red line you're describing is the equivalent model to a possible world in Molinism. It is the exact equivalent. So, except with the difference that on Molinism, you've got that creative decree that God decides what world will occur. And you're saying, no, God doesn't decide, he sees what will occur. but it's
Yeah,
still
no, I got, yeah, I got,
possible.
fair. I follow. Yeah.
You follow? Okay, good. So now the logical sufficiency of a single counterfactual to your model, which means that I only have to find one counterexample where God doesn't, or where one event is not on that thin red line to break down
Right,
the
got you.
model,
Yeah, got you.
because that's a contradictory.
Got you.
Okay,
Yeah.
and that's the beautiful thing of arguing. So open theists do not argue that God doesn't know anything of the future. They argue that some things are knowable, some things are not knowable. So we're at the some God knows some things about the future perfectly well. God doesn't know some things about the future, because some things are open possibilities. Okay? So whatever he has decided, no, whatever he sees ahead. So I say it like this: what can be known of the future, necessarily God knows it. All right?
Yeah, okay.
So what, that's fine. So this, which is why dynamic omniscience folks and most open theists will say God has omniscience and God has foreknowledge of the future, because he knows everything that will occur as going to occur, and everything that might occur as things that might occur
Yeah,
or
no,
might
okay,
not
yeah,
occur.
got it, yeah.
That's fine?
Yeah.
So which is why this describes the whole of reality.
Yeah,
Okay.
I follow you.
So you were right to you were right to speak of prophecy as being perhaps the single most important possible defeater to open theism. Because if all these, in the same way that if there's one, the alternate model falls down, if all of them are possibly known, then the open theism falls down.
Right.
So these two are mutually exclusive. So prophecy, you're right to say, it is perhaps the most important possible defeater to open theism. Now, prophecy as a literary style in scripture, to say it like this.
Okay. Well, but just stop you there, because I think we're
Yeah.
I want to get to that, but I think like
Okay.
we're kind of running ahead. So
Perfect. Go ahead. Sorry.
so it's okay. So my question was, so what if God? So I've got two things, two nuances I want to bring to that scenario. What if God is, as I said, what if it's not that there's this kind of pre-built street that he runs down that street, which implies fixity and unchangeability, because the street is there, you have to follow the path that's before you. What if he's just in his, infinite computational power? What if he's able to extrapolate everything that will be? He can tell if the Mandela effect, for example, he can tell if a butterfly flaps its wings in Brazil, it's going to cause a hurricane in Florida. Yeah. What if that's how he knows the future? Not because it already exists, not because there's a thin red line out in the future, but because he can just crunch everything, all the observations and all the data, and be able to tell everything that's going to be, including the movement of atoms.
See, what you're describing to me, to my mind, is a deterministic worldview. Because in a deterministic model, for instance, you spoke of the
Mandela
butterfly
effect.
Or the butterfly effect or Mandela effect. But let's use the butterfly effect. So climate models are highly deterministic, because everything in the model, every action incurs a reaction. Right. So these are highly deterministic, but highly unpredictable, because of the enormous amount of interactions between the elements involved in the climate models. So these are deterministic models. These are deterministic relationship. Granted, so God, I believe God, because He is omniscient, He can know what effect this butterfly wing will do in South America. Let's say he flaps in Europe, He knows what effect this little wingspan will do in South America because He has this ability to foreknow all the interactions of the molecules and all the path and everything of that, because this is a deterministic model. Now, as soon as you put in an indeterministic element, whatever that is, so it is not determined,
Right.
then there's no more possibility to ascertain where everything will go because there's no straight line.
I got it. Yeah.
Okay, so there's no straight line. So if you say that God can commute everything, because this is an old saying that I can't remember the guy's name. Anyway, I don't remember. He used to say, if you know all the position and speed of all the elements in the universe, now you will know where everything will be in 100 years.
Okay.
Something, I don't remember the exact quote, but this was the gist of it. But this is the exact illustration that you're giving me, that because God knows everything now that is occurring now, the speed and the interactions of every particle, He will know it in 100 years. But this presupposes a highly deterministic element because every path is set.
Yeah, agreed.
All right?
Yeah.
As soon as you put in indeterministic elements like free will, because even though free will is self-determinism, it's not deterministic. So for me, it's not by chance, because I decide, I deliberate, I decide, and I make a decision. But for anybody else that's outside of my mind, it is chance, it is random.
Okay, so that's fair. If we say that God is able to perfectly extrapolate all states of being, that basically yields a fully causally closed deterministic universe.
Definitely, because at every point, at every smallest unit of time.
No, I got you. From the atomic to the macro. Yeah, you're right. And even it seems that the Lord kind of, because the atheistic side of science is going that way, which is kind of just interesting to note that Calvinism, deterministic theology, and atheism are agreed on the deterministic nature of the universe. And I think the Lord has by allowing men to discover, or at least to consider, the possibility of quantum physics, to kind of break that, because quantum physics, it's like we can't quite understand what happens by the sheer fact, it's like the Heisenberg principle and things like this, and the double split experiment. Just the mere fact that you observe a phenomenon changes it, alters it, and we're not sure how atoms function, and we can't predict their path and the location. You can't predict all the variables at the same time, know them all at the same time. So it's like the Lord communicating to the scientists that there is a mysterious element in there that is not deterministic. And if it was deterministic, we would, oddly enough, join the Calvinists by breaking man's responsibility, because if there's no free will, then there's no responsibility, which would make God the cause of all evil, because He set in motion that universe, which could be perfectly extrapolated. So I accept your counter objection.
So and this reminds me of a beautiful quote by C.S. Lewis. He said, "What must be the quality of that being whose far off and momentary coruscations are like this?" So in other words, he was saying, when we look at the world,
whose far off and momentary what?
Coruscation. When the sun, the light of the sun goes through the clouds, and you just see the beams of the, and so these are coruscation. So he was saying that when we look at nature, it is like these coruscation, these beams going through the clouds. We can just look at the beam and try to picture what that God must be like to have created such a world like this.
Yeah, amen.
And that's a beautiful image. And so if there is quantum reality, if there is quantum indeterminacy, then God must be like this. There must be some
Right, no, I
sort of,
get it, yeah. Creation
you know,
reflects the creator.
exactly. Creation
So,
reflects the creator.
by the way, I want to tell our listeners that Brother Patrice Petel, he's got a YouTube channel called Deep Dive and Theology Deep Dive. The link is in the description. And he's doing this in English, and he's a Quebecer from Quebec. So it's extra
Un vrai
mental
Québécois.
effort. Un vrai Québécois. So it's extra mental effort for him to communicate a very convoluted, very complicated, let's say, concept. So, three-body problem. I think I don't know if Brother Warren is still in the chat. He was there. That's a valid point. That's something to consider, I should say, is that I'm essentially talking what does God, when I'm talking about the modality of the foreknowledge of God, the question is, what does God ground his knowledge in? And he says God grounds his knowledge in himself and his creation. The future doesn't exist, but present intentions do. So I guess what your answer even closed the door on my second scenario. So I had a scenario with another nuance that I had introduced in, was that I see a God in the Bible that limits his foreknowledge. So he like Jesus Christ in his humanity limits his knowledge of the day of his own second coming. You see God, at least that's how I describe it, and there might be a better model for describing it, but I see God limiting his foreknowledge of what Adam would call the animals, so he can experience the surprise and novelty of a parent hearing his child name the animals' names. He limits his foreknowledge in seeing whether Abraham would pass the trial or the temptation or not, because when Abraham offers up his son, he says, "Now know I that thou fearest God." And I believe that as it says, I don't want to let my philosophy or theology deny the text, because at the end of the day, my most fundamental source of knowledge and apprehension of God is the scriptures. And if he says, "Now I know," it's now I know. So he did gain a practical knowledge of Abraham's decision to sacrifice his son. What I've been saying is, God could have tapped into his full knowledge, and he has the theoretical power. He has not theoretical. He has the potentiality of having known what Abraham would do beforehand, but he locked himself out of it, so he can experience the discovery of Abraham's decision. And so I take that. Yeah, and I'll finish the point and I'll get to you. So I take that because I realize there's still a problem in what I'm describing. So I take that and I'm saying maybe the open theists are considering that God at all times accesses that knowledge of the future, but not necessarily. He may lock himself out of that future knowledge. However, the fact that God limits his perception of a potential future doesn't change the fact that future would still be perfectly causally determined in all things if he is going to prophesy it, is what you're saying.
Yeah. So what you're describing so earlier I said that dynamic omniscience was a subspecies of open theism, and two of the other possible open theist models are called voluntary or involuntary nescience, Nescience, anyway, nescience, which means voluntary ignorance or involuntary ignorance.
Oh, okay.
And
can you spell that again? I'm gonna type it in the chat. Voluntary.
Okay. Voluntary.
Yeah.
Nescience. So NES.
Yeah.
Like NE and science afterwards. Like omniscience, but instead of omni, you put NE instead.
NESC, like necessity.
NE. Yeah.
No,
NESC.
NESC. Yeah.
IENCE.
IENCE. Nescience. Okay. Yeah.
Nescience, exactly.
And what's the other model?
So either involuntary or voluntary nescience.
Voluntary. Okay, let's
And
let's
so
really geek out tonight. Here we go.
yes, let's geek out. So these two models, so what they're saying is that that thin red line, so true propositional truth about this thin red line, future thin red line, they exist somewhere.
Okay.
But voluntary nescience means that God, like you were describing, shut out his knowledge of these truths.
Oh, I didn't even know that was there. Nice. So I don't have to write a book on it. Okay.
Okay. And actually, and the other one, involuntary means that these truths exist, but God doesn't know them.
Okay.
Okay. So these are two other models of open theism that existed in the past, and some of them still hold to this. So, if I'm not mistaken, what's his name? Man, I must be tired. My faculties. One of the first authors that wrote about open theism.
You're talking about the modern era, like John Sanders?
Modern. He wrote a book with John Sanders. Anyways.
Wait, what's his name? What is it?
Boy.
Boyd?
No. Let's me just
Maybe Warren knows.
cheat.
Yeah, no problem. I cheat all the time. God limited his foreknowledge when he created a free and relational world, which reflects him. He could have created a settled world, but chose not to. Interesting.
Clark Pinnock. Okay. So Clark Pinnock, in his first book, Open Theism, he described, if I remember correctly, he described something somewhat like you were describing. So God willfully closed out his knowledge. So, but these two models, like you came to that same conclusion. These two models presuppose. These two models presuppose what? Presuppose one thin red line.
Yeah, it doesn't solve the. Got it. Yeah. So.
Yeah.
Okay. Because I mean, the main obstacle to me is there's two things, but the main one is prophecy in the scriptures. And I've listened to hours of open theists talk about this. And I mean, I wish I could get on some of those live streams and talk. Actually, it'd be I hope you get on some of those, because I really like your spirit, and you've done some research into this, having a PhD in it. But it's the prophecies. I mean, and it's not so. Let's completely ignore. I will not appeal to any prophecies where God says He will do something.
Okay.
And so let's completely put those out, right? There's a lot of things where He says, I will cause this, I will do this. Okay, granted. So that's God Himself, not so much predicting the future as He is declaring His intention. And if God intends to do something, He's going to do it, and none can stay His hand. So let's put those out of the conversation. There's a lot of them where a lot of people say, well, so they'll say it's a conditional statement when it's not a conditional statement. So take a passage, something like Daniel chapter 11, where God is predicting sins, and He's not the one causing sins. And He's talking about the king of the north doing this and taking this country over, and people dying here, and then He's going to retreat, and He's going to do that. And so how do you explain passages which are detailed and which are describing the future actions of free will human agents or angelic agents that are not caused by God directly?
Yeah. So, first of all, let me just back up a little bit and just speak of prophecy, because this is so there are about, if I got my notes here, about 31,000 verses in scripture that
31,102. Yeah. And I'm not talking about pattern prophet. I'm not talking about patterns fulfilled. I'm not talking like, out of Egypt have I called my son.
Right.
I'm not talking, so I'm ignoring those. I'm talking about explicit declarations.
So about 27% of these prophecies are predictive.
Okay.
The rest The rest are all God speaking through his prophet to declare things to his people. But about 27%, if my calculations are right, are predictive. But I don't think that predictive prophecies are altogether different than all the other prophecies, because most prophecies, or pretty much most, yeah, a good number of it, I don't want to say all, because, but God is, so prophecy is depicted in the Bible as a complex and multifaceted phenomenon, with divine prediction being just one of its possible features. So God has this relationship with his people, and he is speaking to his prophet to do things, to communicate things. Now, these prophecies, these predictive prophecies, in my mind, most of them are warnings. So they're warning. So in a warning,
Well, so you're saying they're conditional. They're conditional statements.
they are
They're contingent.
well,
Like
all these warnings are
if
contingent.
P then Q. If you do this, this happens. If you don't do that,
Yeah.
this doesn't happen. So let's throw that out.
All the warning, yeah.
So let's focus on, even if it were 1%, let's focus on that
1%.
category which
No.
posits the greatest challenge to open theism.
So there are three ways. I just want to find my notes here because I don't want to.
No, take your time.
I don't want to, yeah. So usually open theism, the open theists will categorize those other prophecies, well, including those, I guess, the prophecies in three types. Predictive prophecies, they categorize it in three types. So God may make a prediction based on a unilateral determination to bring about an event.
Okay,
right. So unilateral. So God says this will occur. That kid, his name, he will be called Cyrus. So this is a unilateral declaration, and there's no moral responsibility in calling a kid Cyrus or calling him Bob. So,
yeah, I mean, I'm putting all these. I want to go back to those because I think even those have a challenge to open theism. But, okay. So, but you want to go through the categories? Go ahead. That's fair.
Yeah. So, and then we talked about conditional, the warnings, all the warnings. Let's put this together. So, I agree that God can anticipate occurrences, but I don't. But I don't see where in Scripture where that anticipation to be before creation. All the prophets, when they prophesy something, it's in time. The prophet says something that will occur in 10, 20, or it can occur now, in a few days, a few months, few years. Never in Scripture do we see this in the past. In the past, in eternity past.
Yeah, okay.
We are also always in time, the prophet is speaking. So God is revealing something to the prophet and he's speaking. So now, even though if I cannot explain how we can do all this, all I need to want to keep open theism, or to want to say it is biblical, is one counterexample to a prophecy that God said would happen that did not happen.
Okay, so sorry if I can just pause you there, Pat. What part of what is it about which you were saying, even though I cannot explain this? What was this?
Well, let's say
the percentage of predictive prophecies that remain that cannot be explained.
Yeah, maybe let's say 1%, like you were saying. If there's 1% that God, in all His wisdom, can anticipate these movements.
Okay.
I don't know how to explain some of the prophecies. Perhaps they are determined event. So let me explain the difference between what is called local fatalism and universal fatalism. So universal fatalism means that everything is fated. So Calvinism and all the other ism, deterministic worldview.
Right. Yeah. There's no maverick molecule. Yeah.
There's no. Yeah. So that's universal fatalism. Local fatalism, what that is that an event is fated to occur, but the time or the way that it will occur is not necessarily fated. So so if there's an event that God, so let's take King Hezekiah, who was supposed to die, but prayed. So he prays, and God seemingly changes his mind and says through the prophet, well, I'll add 15 more years. So he will still die. But the events that led to his death, those were not fated, even though the death was fated. I'll add 15 more years, so 15 years later he will die.
Fair.
Okay, so that's local fatalism. So the fact that God says or decides that this will occur that way, for instance, the angels, this is not a problem for me that this is a locally fated event, because it does not imply that the road from here to there has been fated. It just means that God has decided that at such a time, such a point, let me give you an illustration of this cruise boat. You know, a cruise ship?
Yes.
So if you go on a cruise, so the captain
Not yet,
has
hopefully
decided.
someday.
If you go on a cruise, the captain has decided all the stops, and usually if you book it in advance, yeah, me too someday. I never went on it. I just look at the brochures and this seems interesting. So, but in the brochures they show all the stops where the thing will stop, so where the ship will stop. But before that, even the trajectory has been planned out. But what occurs on the boat, what I do on the boat, hey, I'm free on the boat, even though the stops are scheduled.
Okay.
So I see this a little bit like this with God. So God has determined some prophetic event to occur. He locally fated them because he decided, I want this to occur. And this is foreknown and this is foretold.
But
now, yeah, sure, go ahead.
So that's why my question was about God predicting evil actions.
So,
because he didn't determine those. He didn't fate those.
No, unless those were required for what's going to occur. For the death of Christ. So he had predicted almost the death of Christ.
It looks like we're switching sides now, you and me, because I don't think those were fated in, like, he didn't fate Judas to betray him.
No, I agree with you. Okay. So it was locally fated, but the elements leading to this fated event were not determined.
Okay.
So, Galatians 4:4, when times were accomplished, well, Christ came.
Yeah, but what about? Okay, but the path towards that locally fated event is not determined. But
no.
But what if the event in question here, because the Lord is speaking about it, so you could look at it as the event or the path towards the event. The Lord is telling you somebody's gonna do something evil.
Yeah.
So he's not causing that evil. How does he predict the evil if he's not causing it, if he's not fating it?
So I think that's a good question. How? I don't know. I don't know how. I know that he does. So a lot of things I don't know how.
So that's kind of where I am too. If in open theism we can allow ourselves, and that's that's really an honest answer. If an open theism can say to some things I don't know, then can't simple foreknowledge also say to itself, I don't know? How God can know the future without it not being causal? Like maybe the issue is we don't know and that's why Dave Hunt in his essay, he says, I don't know the mechanism whereby God predicts the future. Maybe
I agree.
Maybe there's some kind of modality of foreknowledge which doesn't imply a deterministic future that we just
I don't know
know
why.
about,
excuse me, I don't want to cut you, but
Go ahead.
for some X reason, my phone is going to die and it has my mic on it.
Oh, yeah.
So I'll need to change mic and
Sure.
plug my phone.
Sure.
So just a second.
So you guys in the chat, if you have, I'm very thankful the chat's still going on and the live is still going on, because according to my OBS YouTube studio, there isn't even a stream happening right now, but you guys are there. I appreciate it. If you have any comments, if you have any questions, let me know in the chat. And if you have any questions for Dr. Petel, guys, put them in the chat and we'll ask him those questions.
So can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Excellent, excellent, excellent. So I don't know where my mic is picking. Is it the sound? Is it good? Still good?
It was better before. Now it seems like you're being picked up on a different mic. Maybe, I don't know.
Yeah, well, I'm being picked up by the phone mic. My since my phone is dead, I need to plug it in, and I can't plug my
Oh,
my
gotcha.
receiver.